My name's Catherine Crockett. I'm a board member of the Monterey Peace and Justice Center, and I want to welcome you all here. How many of you are here for the first time? That's great. We're happy to have you. So I'm a board member. We've got several others here. We're a small nonprofit, all volunteer. We've got Judy Karras, the board member, Linda Hamilton, Alexandra Ramos, at the back there, and Sydney Ramsden Scott over here. So before we get started, please silence your devices. And I do want to wait, but while we're waiting here, I want to tell you about an event that's coming up on August 2nd, Saturday. It's the Hiroshima-Nagasaki Remembrance. It's the 80th commemoration of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki by the United States. And that's a milestone. The survivors are fewer, but we want to amplify their voices, and that's what this is all about. If you haven't been to this event, it's in Pacific Grove, Lovers Point Cove, and it's a program of speakers, poets, song, what else? We had taiko drummers, we have lantern making. The lanterns are pulled behind kayaks over the cove waters after sunset. Shakuhachi flute, Japanese flute, bamboo flute, is playing while the lanterns float over the cove. And it's symbolic of the people, the victims, people who died. And so we just want to amplify the voices and work towards nuclear weapons for the future. So that's what that's all about. We hope you'll join us. And it's our 21st event. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom puts this on every year, organizes it, and it's a beautiful and moving event. We want to thank the Japanese American Citizens League for allowing us to show this film, and they loaned us the DVD for this, in fact. And is Ms. McComb here, Carolyn McComb here? I want to acknowledge you. You are executive director of this film project, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, we're happy to have you, and we thank you for your role in bringing this to light. A local historian in Monterey, was that Pascal Covici? Okay, Steinbeck's...
I think it's Tim Thomas.
Oh, Tim Thomas, okay.
Yeah.
He made an extraordinary discovery of a 16 millimeter film from 1938, and it captured local Japanese American community members just enjoying time at the wharf and playing baseball. And alongside this remarkable, never before seen footage of a community on the brink of upheaval was a trove of signed petitions advocating for the restoration of civil rights to the same American community. And Enduring Democracy, the Monterey Petition, tells the story of the historian's incredible discovery and the petition drive led by John Steinbeck's editor and a group of valiant women protesting the Japanese American incarceration and racism during World War II. So we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you.
How was the film made?
When was the film made?
Yeah, 2022.
2022. 2022. That's recent.
August of 2013. A young woman, a high school kid, we brought in to help upstairs to clean up some of the drawers upstairs that are kind of a mess, and she was doing some cleaning things up. And she actually ran across an old 16 millimeter film in the drawer there. A film that was shot about 1938 that shows the Japanese community here in Monterey playing baseball down the wharf, having fun. And so, gee, we'd never seen this film before. So I began to look through the drawers, and I see this sort of rolled up envelope. So I pull them out of the envelope, probably the first time since 1945, and I unrolled them and I saw what they were, and oh, holy mackerel.
What is the legality of rounding people up without trial, without evidence, and without any due process of any kind? They are incarcerated merely because he looked like the enemy. They lost their property, they lost their businesses, some had lost their lives. And even after the war, after the people returned from the war, they were subjected to vandalism, attacks, threats, this sort of thing. That was pretty commonplace. The Monterey Petition is a textbook example of people standing up for what the country should be about. For these people in Monterey to take a contrary stand and see the humanity behind it, that's pretty exceptional. I think it's a lesson for all time.
Monterey was originally a Spanish town, Spanish capital of California.
I mean, they were speaking Spanish here until the 1890s. This was not your typical New England replica California town. This was a different place.
Very large Sicilian, Italian population. And we often forget about the important Japanese-American contribution to the fishing community here.
Sicilians and Japanese fishermen dominated the economy here.
Japanese came here because of fishing. So the Japanese came here for abalone, and they also came here for salmon.
And they've been completely sort of written out of that history. It's all focused on the Italians and Sicilians.
In the 1909 salmon season, there were 185 salmon boats working the Monterey Bay. 145 of them were Japanese-owned.
The Monterey Peninsula was such a multicultural, a wonderful mix of people, and many of the racist things that grew other places didn't take root here.
But the Japanese who came to Monterey, one of the things they did was they westernized themselves immediately and got involved within the communities themselves. Monterey is the only place where the fishermen here had one union. Whereas in Southern California, Northern California, all the ethnic groups had separate unions. Monterey had one. Monterey is a small town. These guys all grew up together and they all went to school together, they all played together. But the real key, at least for me, the real key was baseball. They all played baseball together. And it was not uncommon for these young Japanese boys to learn to speak Italian before they learned to speak English, and those Italian boys that learned to speak Japanese before they learned to speak English. And if you look at any photograph from any Japanese event that's going on, the first thing you'll see in every photograph is the American flag. They always have that flag out there.
Japanese-owned farms all in the Carmel Valley and around the Monterey Peninsula.
The Miyamoto family that farmed around Carmel Mission and Lower Carmel Valley before the war, they had strawberry farms, and they would invite the local kids to come down and pick strawberries at 5 cents a basket. And of course, we would steal a few as we were going along. And I don't think I've ever tasted a strawberry as good as those. No, I don't think the Miyamotos did farm down there anymore afterwards.
After the war, they lost the land, they lost the business, they lost all that.
And I asked Maya Miyamoto why he has never been resentful, and he said, "It's in the past. We've got to get over it."
There's a Japanese saying, shigata ga nai, which kind of means unpleasantness is not to be noticed.
It can't be helped. You just have to suck it up and deal with it.
Many Issei Nisei parents did not talk about camp life or the evacuation from their homes.
They didn't talk about it, they sucked it up and marched on.
But over time, as it became more acceptable within the Japanese community to begin to talk about it, they did.
I count myself as one of the lucky people who grew up during the time when Martin Luther King was alive. Of course, during the struggle for black civil rights, we as Japanese Americans, as Asian Americans, wondered about our own past.
The Japanese had no navy to speak of at all in 1850. Admiral Perry came and said, "Welcome to the world," in 1853. Japan immediately begins to ramp up. Their technology explodes. They're so good at stuff. We brought them a model train and they were making railroads in 5 years.
There had been misunderstandings, disagreements between Japan and the United States going back to 1900.
In 1905, the Japanese Navy, they took on the Russians. The Russian fleet came all the way around, came up along the coast, and in the Straits of Tsushima, the Japanese Navy sank them, destroyed them. That is such a seminal event in the history of the world. At that moment, brown people, particularly people who were colonials, all sat up and said, "Say what?" It became the inspiration for revolutionary movements everywhere in Asia. Japan was becoming a formidable country.
There grew increasing concern about the role of Japan and trade with the U.S.
Pearl Harbor doesn't come out of nowhere. Pearl Harbor comes out of the fact that the growing power had a natural resource deficit. They didn't have iron ore, they didn't have oil. Meanwhile, in 1905, the Asiatic Exclusion League was founded in San Francisco, which sort of picked up the anti-Chinese stuff, warmed it up, and became the basis of the anti-Japanese movement in California.
In 1924, U.S. Congress passes legislation which severely limits further Japanese immigration to the U.S.
The Congress shuts off Japanese immigration altogether. Huge uproar in Japan. They lost face. Actually, on June 1st, 1924, in Tokyo, they had a national humiliation day. Humiliation over the fact that America had snubbed them.
Or more accurately, the elite diplomatic community.
So you can see this thing is building, and the only thing between Japan and California is water. By the 30s, internationally, everybody knew there was going to be a war between the United States and Japan. I mean, this is not a secret, and it's making everybody very nervous. War with Japan was not a surprise. Pearl Harbor was a surprise. That was a shock. That knocked everybody off their balance.
We interrupt this broadcast and bring you this important bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington. The White House announces Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.
The way we spent an evening was around the radio, listening to the news. I mean, that's the entertainment we had, was the radio. Everyone, of course, was crying. We were all scared, too. We were terrified.
Pearl Harbor. There was no warning. Oh, I was shocked when that happened. I couldn't believe that Japanese soldiers would attack Pearl Harbor, being that there were so many Japanese already there. Some of the kids in my class, they had brothers that were killed in Hawaii, and that really shook me up. And here I'm Japanese, so.
We, Americans, tend to look at Pearl Harbor and then, for some reason, don't know what happened between Pearl Harbor and, say, the summer. The night of December 7th, that Sunday evening, I call it the night of the kitchen tables. It's the night when everybody, not just Japanese, but everybody was sitting around a kitchen table going, what's going to happen to us? What are we going to do? How do we respond to this? And by doing that, they turned in. They turned in and started to worry, as we all naturally do, about themselves. And as they are all turned in, a community disappears behind them.
After Pearl Harbor, the anti-Japanese sentiment really intensifies.
General John L. DeWitt, for example, said that the Japanese race is an enemy race. The very fact that no sabotage has occurred to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken, quote unquote. What kind of conspiracy theory is that? General John L. DeWitt was a QAnon of his day.
But critical to this whole story was the absolute palpable fear that was here on the coast. Part of the plan Japanese had in place, Admiral Yamamoto, to move the submarines onto the American coast. There are 9 what are called I-boats stationed from Seattle to San Diego. They're just off the coast, maybe 50 to 100 miles. On each submarine, they had a collection of bamboo poles. They're probably 10 feet long, painted black, with a big stone on one end and a piece of glass on the other. Periodically, they would throw one of those overboard, which would then sit up in the water. People would stand on the beach and go, look, there's a Japanese submarine. People were terrified. And it starts for the Monterey Peninsula on the 20th of December. And submarine I-23 surfaces off of the Cypress Point golf course in the full view of golfers. So they come up and they chase a tanker across the surface using their deck gun, and they don't hit it. But in full view of God and everybody, right, there's a Japanese submarine, 363 feet long. These are big puppies, firing this 5.5-inch cannon, which makes an enormous noise, pow, boom, and chasing a tanker right across Monterey Bay, right in front of everybody. Newspapers play it up because censorship came immediately after Pearl Harbor. Local newspapers, national newspapers, their news is being controlled by the military. Well, they couldn't not know this. Pow, boom.
I can remember them talking about the submarines down the coast, right where Mom and Dad had lived when they were younger. When your parents are afraid, you're afraid too.
They really did think they were going to be invaded. And so fear does do horrible things.
Enemy planes and scare headlines on December 8th are purely imaginary. But on February 23rd, 1942, a submarine does shell a refinery near Santa Barbara. The highest military authorities are certain the enemy does not plan an invasion, but behind the defenses, fear is screaming hate. Columnist Westbrook Pegler wants all Japanese under guard, and to hell with habeas corpus. Columnist Henry McLemore writes, I hate Japanese, all of them.
And what you find is, at times of economic depression, economic challenge, or war, that this xenophobia springs up in California history.
Americans are remembering with vengeance in their heart.
When conspiracy theories and alternative facts hold sway over the real ones, then a society can descend into a very dark place where neither facts matter, the law doesn't matter, nor the Constitution. And at that point, not only do people suffer, in this case Japanese Americans, but democracy itself is imperiled.
The restrictions start actually in January, and they begin to tighten. They tighten their bank accounts, they collect all the radios, but they did that actually for the Italians and the Germans too.
A lot of prejudice in those days. Italians got a lot of prejudice. Germans, there was a lot of prejudice. Japanese, the worst probably. It was hysteria.
But especially in time of war. There's no ceiling to human hate.
The FBI had been targeting these people long before the war started. They were looking for leaders in the Japanese community, the Italian community, and the German community.
15 individuals, men all, were in fact arrested in the morning hours and taken away by the FBI. This happened in several local communities up and down the West Coast.
Well, I was at school, and I came home, and my mother and my older sister were standing at the door waiting for me. I said, what happened? She said, oh, they took Dad away. And then it came out in the paper. There were about 12 or 15 of the Japanese community leaders that were taken to a place in San Francisco, Shark Park.
I spent 30 years talking to people who were here during this period. During that period, from December 7th to about the 1st of May. And what I was curious about was, where the hell were you? Where were you when this thing started to round up the very people that you knew, the people that you were your neighbors? Why didn't you say something?
You were disappointed, you know? You're born and raised here, and then all of a sudden they drag your father.
The first Japanese American arrested was a friend of mine named Tommy Katatani. They came at him with full force. They threatened his loved ones. They threatened the community. And I think that's an important reason why people accepted this. It's a lot more complex if you think they should have rebelled early on.
Executive Order 9066 was issued on February 19, 1942 by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. What it did was establish the Western Defense Command, which was authorized to create military zones of exclusion leading up to the forced removal of 120,000 Japanese on the West Coast.
Tuesday, April 28, 1942.
Instructions to all persons of Japanese.
All persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien.
Both alien and non-alien be evacuated from the above area by 12 o'clock noon.
President Roosevelt decided that the best thing to do would be to gather all the Japanese along the coast and take them away so that they would not be giving information. This was our view of what was happening.
You know, people sitting in grammar school, you know, half the class was gone the next day.
What is the legality of rounding people up on the naked accusation of the military alone that you're dangerous, without trial, without evidence, without any due process of any kind?
This is something the government said they wanted to do and they had to do, and that was the word they used, was internment. It was a gentler word.
They invented a whole language to justify that process, whether it was evacuation or relocation or internment. Yeah, I think we're struggling to find a description of what America did to its own people. There's words that have been used to soften it, to such a point that it becomes meaningless. It's not an evacuation. It's not a relocation. It is the removal of person's civil liberties. I think incarceration is a more accurate way of portraying what happened.
The public really had no choice. You can't stop the U.S. government doing things like that. They'll shoot you.
This just didn't happen in the United States. In Canada, they made a move against Japanese and Italians. They did it in Mexico.
They were being taken away, leaving all of their possessions behind. It was very scary for us to think that we could do that to them.
How could right-minded people allow this to happen? I mean, the government's basically stupid. We know that.
Fortunately, we now know, because of Freedom of Information Act, that it was a great deal more sinister than that. There was no reason to do this roundup. That the incarceration result of very highly educated people intentionally suppressing facts, evidence, intelligence reports in order to achieve a political end that would benefit them, even if it meant lying to the U.S. Supreme Court. That's a very different story than saying that the Japanese-American incarceration was the result of stupidity.
And we were given approximately, if I recall, 5 or 6 days to pack up, sell Dad's business, and be ready to report to one of 16, 17 so-called assembly centers, which were really detention centers.
You know, my father, he received his diploma from Berkeley mailed to him while he was being held in a horse stall. My father's family, and my mother's family too, almost 8,000 Japanese Americans were put in Tanforan Assembly Center. That was a horse track converted into a temporary detention camp. Men, women, and children were put in horse stalls, which is a naked light bulb, no heat, no hot water.
It was kind of scary thinking where would we go? All the Japanese-American Japanese of ancestry were herded up and put into camps. And one of the camps was in Poston, Arizona, in the middle of the Arizona desert. There were thousands of us there.
A typical barrack was 20 feet wide and 120 feet long. By being a family of 6, we got a room that was 24 by 20.
They all suffered, you know. Some of them were beaten pretty badly by the guards, you know. They just, of course, they had kids that died at Pearl Harbor or something like that.
There's a few instances of people who walked too close to the wire and were shot dead.
And I spent my sophomore, junior, and senior year there.
Well, we wrote letters every day to Washington, please release my dad. And so they finally did let us join them in Crystal City. And it was a family camp. There were maybe about 3,000 of us families, fathers and mothers and kids.
At the beginning of 1943, people began to get drafted out of those camps to serve in the U.S. Army. My father was drafted.
The Americanism of the great majority of America's Japanese finds its highest expression in the thousands who are in the United States Army. Almost half of them are in a Japanese-American combat team. Some of the volunteers came from Hawaii. Hundreds of them volunteered while they were in relocation centers.
Volunteers out of camp, about 1,200 out of the camps, young men. That formed the 442nd, which went on to fight heroically in the European theater, in Italy, all the way up to Germany, which incidentally turned out to be the most decorated military unit in all of American military history.
And my husband was in the 442nd. Yes, he was the first sergeant of service company. He didn't talk about it very much.
No.
No. He was in Europe, fighting in France and Italy. His parents are in camp like that, you know. And that's where we stayed for 3 years during the war.
Is there anything left of the old Japantown? A few homes, residential homes, and the JCL Hall.
So we knew there had been this petition drive in May of 1945, but we never knew that the petition still existed. We didn't even think about it. We just assumed they were long gone. August of 2013. A young woman, a high school kid, we brought in to help upstairs to clean up some of the drawers upstairs. And she actually ran across an old 16mm film in the drawer there. A film that was shot about 1938 that shows the Japanese community here in Monterey playing baseball down the wharf, having fun. So I began to look through the drawers, and I could see some blue things hanging out of it. And I thought initially it looked like blueprints. So I pulled them out of an envelope, probably the first time since 1945, and I unrolled them, and I saw what they were. And oh, holy mackerel. I realized how important they were, and so and how they tied all the story together.
And I first heard about it from Tim. He sent me an email and said, "You never guessed what I found."
When I was first shown these petitions, I remember shaking. I thought they were so beautiful and such a wonderful expression of empathy and camaraderie for the Japanese American community. The petition in Monterey was a direct response to an advertisement taken by a group in Salinas that they placed in the Monterey Herald that attacked Japanese Americans from coming back to the region.
And it was essentially an organization to stop the Japanese from coming back to the West Coast.
There was just one name attached to it, and it was the Monterey Bay Council on Japanese Relations. We tracked down who that was, and it led back to this one particular individual in Salinas.
Edward Seifert, who I believe was a lawyer and worked for an organization called the Salinas Valley Growers Shippers Association.
He was very powerful. He was very well funded, and he had control of the growers community throughout the valley. Seifert's anti-Japanese activities stretch back to the 1930s. The Japanese were targeted here almost as soon as they arrived. They threatened the power structure of California agriculture.
A lot of the anti-Japanese stuff is economic. It's competition.
I think that there was an advantage to some of the farmers in the Salinas Valley especially of not wanting the Japanese to come back.
They were very hard workers and very successful. In other words, they were rising competitors. And when you get too close to taking away my business and job, I'm going to find a way to push it back.
But you also, there's the element of race there.
They go hand in hand, and I use this metaphor because one doesn't exist without the other.
In 1942, a representative of the Salinas Valley Growers Association was interviewed in the Saturday Evening Post. He finally just says it. We don't want to compete with them. We don't want them to come back. He just says it flat out. We don't want them to come back. You want this coast for white people or brown people? All the standard racist stuff that had been going on since 1905.
The ad that appeared in the Herald was unsigned. And from my point of view, that's about as gutless as it gets. The anonymity of it sort of reeked of what was going on over in Germany. People in the community of Monterey were shocked, and they took that initial shock and took it into action.
If you go through the Herald, the ad comes out first, and then The next day, the rebuttal letters start, these individual letters. Karis Wilson Weston, Tony Ricketts is in there. And then there's Mrs. Sumita's wonderful letter that comes out of camp.
I am an American citizen of Japanese ancestry and formerly a resident of Monterey. At present, I am in a relocation camp in Poston, Arizona, where at one time over 20,000 Japanese made their homes. Last week when I received my issue of the Herald, I was quite hurt to read the large ad in the paper, quote, "to discourage the return of the Japanese to the West Coast," unquote. My husband is fighting in Italy now, along with hundreds of other Nisei soldiers, fighting for what he believes is right, the American way of life. Someday when the war is over, we hope to return to Monterey with our little son. I want to thank the people of Monterey who wrote to the Herald to defend us. I know as long as there are people like that left in this country, all the Nisei boys did not die in vain, and what they fought for will live on. Respectfully yours, Mrs. Yukio Sumita.
And so this group of sort of forward-thinking citizens said, no, these are American citizens. They were born here. They have as much right to be here as we do.
Okay, specifically Tony Ricketts, Edward Ricketts, and I saw Steinbeck in here someplace.
John Steinbeck signed this? I go to Salinas High School, and John Steinbeck went to school there. Yep, so of course I know who he is. I've read the Red Pony, I think, Grapes of Wrath, good stuff. Heck yeah, Steinbeck, you rule.
Literature that he wrote, the predicament of ordinary people, caught under circumstances not of their control, victimized. In that sense, it doesn't surprise me, but this is quite a historical document.
And if you think about Steinbeck's work, he identifies with those communities in Monterey in ways that he doesn't in Salinas.
Which made people in Salinas furious. People did not like him in Salinas at that time.
The canning season was very, very lively, very noisy, and stinked. A very bad smell. I'm Ed Ricketts Jr. My father was Ed Ricketts Sr., and he lived at what they call the lab on Canterbury Road.
Ed was, of course, a well-known, famous marine biologist, made famous really by John Steinbeck in the books Canterbury and Sweet Thursday.
There were 3 houses of prostitution on Canterbury Road. The lab was right smack across the street from the biggest one. My dad had an awful lot of friends. They were older than I, but younger than he.
I know they had this whole kind of artist colony, Henry Miller and Steinbeck and all these people. I just imagine their lives. Must have been fascinating lives. I did know that Doc was characterized after Ed Ricketts.
Everything is based a little bit on a truth, but John was able to exaggerate an awful lot of things. Physically, they were opposites. John was a big monster, and Dad was a little short guy.
And God bless Ed Ricketts. Ed Ricketts wrote a letter to the Monterey Herald in which he compared this movement in Salinas to what was going on in Germany, and he referred to it specifically as a form of Hitlerism and fascism.
So Tony Ricketts and Tony Jackson are actually the same person. Tony Jackson was the girlfriend of Ed Ricketts at that time, but if you look at the petition, she actually signs it as Tony Ricketts.
Tony was concerned about the treatment of the Japanese in World War II. Tony didn't like it, and so she was giving speeches in favor of the Japanese people. She was the one, I guess, who started all this.
It's just the kind of thing that I could imagine my mom saying, well, let's get a petition going and let's knock on doors and let's let people know. Because in her faith of humanity and the fundamental good, She would assume that if people really understood what was going on, they would see the light and they would join the movement.
These families have made their homes here for many years and have been part of the life of our community.
I know that this is the typewriter that was used by Dad with a small print, elite, not pica. It was typed and composed by Tony.
She was the fastest typist in Ed Ricketts' lab. She was probably the fastest typist in Monterey. I can now hear this ding, ding.
I was able to interview Nancy Costello, who actually signed the petition, and was actually an organizer of that group. And she told me that with this outrage and shock, they wanted to mobilize and to respond as an interracial community to this racism from Salinas.
What I love about this petition is I imagine someone got it and was like, oh, I'm going to take this to my coworkers or my neighbor and ask them to sign it. We tell them the same thing today. Start with the people in your circle, share your petition, with your Facebook friends, or send it to your closest email contacts, or find your family and, make sure that they sign it. And really build that sort of like natural grassroots response to your campaign. And once you start that, that's when you build the foundation for something to get louder and larger in your own community, in your own state, and even in your own country.
What they decided to do was create team leaders to hand out the petitions. If you look on the top of the petitions, you can see who actually carried them around, and they came from different quarters in the community. Nancy took one, Tony Ricketts took one.
I think they just went down the street, and whoever they ran across in the neighborhood, I stood in the corner and said, hey, can you sign this petition?
Tony Ricketts, of course, she takes that to her friends.
And I can look at the one, for example, that was signed by Ed Ricketts and John Steinbeck. I can look at that, and I can tell exactly where they were.
So everyone around there, everyone loved the people, and they were shipped out right away. A great big family of Japanese. Maya Miyamoto, I used to go to school with him. It was a dirty trick. So, of course, my dad was angry. He could sign a thing like that right away.
I suspect that it was Tony Ricketts who took the petition and brought it to Robinson and Una Jeffers in Carmel, and also the Weston clan. They were all part of the artist colony down there at the time, because she was writing for a literary magazine at the time that a lot of the Carmel artisans were writing in and contributing artwork to.
Jeffers was a very important poet to my dad. Very, very important. I don't think they knew each other.
They were both people of great compassion, so it's not surprising that they signed the letter, but at the same time, it is surprising. So it's one of those kind of enigmas. And when I think of Jeffers, I've been thinking about it, and the only thing that comes to mind is a line from his poem, The Answer, where he says, to maintain one's integrity, be merciful and uncorrupted, and not wish for evil. And if that's the way he understood integrity, then the signing of this document certainly fits in and explains it, I think.
Read that petition carefully, because to me, it's a wonderful testimony to the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. It doesn't say, we believe the camps were a mistake, or da, 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 da. That's not what it says. It says, we join the Department of Defense in welcoming back.
The War Department believes that the people of the Pacific Coast area will accord returning persons of Japanese ancestry all the considerations to which they are entitled.
It hitches their wagon to the government, which is very smart. And I think at the time, I don't see any other way they could have done it. The war's not over when this petition is going around.
Take California, South America, Brooklyn, Europe, take whole world.
The government is continuing to keep connected. All of the caricatures of the Japanese military that you see in the press and the posters and everything, You want people to subscribe to war bonds. You want people to continue to volunteer to go in the Army. We got some really serious stuff going on in the Pacific. Bloody, messy, awful stuff. We got Iwo Jima, Okinawa. People's kids are being shipped home, dead, right, from the Pacific. But it isn't easy. I can't imagine going door to door in Salinas trying to convince the good people of Salinas that their son was just killed in the Philippines by Japanese people who had nothing to do with the strawberry grower.
I think they were afraid. I think they were afraid of what would happen, how they would be treated by their neighbors, by the people they work with. I think there was a lot of fear about it. Fear of retaliation, fear of, why are you supporting these Japanese folks who were coming back, and they were our enemies. I'm sure they got a lot of doors slammed in their face.
I'm not signing nothing for no dirty Jap. Go to hell!
For me, that makes it even braver for these folks who did sign these petitions.
Yeah, I think that they had both compassion and courage to do this, because I'm sure they had friends that were really against it.
Wouldn't it be nice if you could talk to all the people who signed? Why? Why'd you do this? What gave you the courage to do this? And then what we do is we bottle that and we spread it around the country.
Because it doesn't come naturally. It really is one of those things where it takes some care and it takes some thought, and when you get it right, you create magic.
I suspect that each one of these persons had a good reason for wanting to sign this. Their head was in the right place, I think.
I think the reason so many people signed it is that the Japanese were very much integrated into the community.
I've been to Manzanar, and that's a dreadful place. I think my dad signed it because he really honestly believed very strongly that what had happened was wrong. Going back to his childhood when he experienced prejudice himself, he really felt that there had been an injustice done. I think it had a very strong impact on him.
Oh, there it is. My father was a first-generation Sicilian. He had polio when he was very young. He managed beautifully. He became an attorney. No matter how terrible a person was that he was dealing with, he could always find something positive or good about them.
Yeah, I recognize the signature. He loved people, and I think that his feeling was probably, well, we were at war with the country of Japan, but that doesn't mean we were at war with all Japanese people.
We know there were maybe 15 or 16 of these petitions that were passed all around the whole entire Monterey Peninsula, gathering signatures not just from famous people, but from all the local, anybody who would sign these petitions. And that resulted in an ad that appeared in the Herald in May of 1945. This is the only place on the West Coast where this happened.
We, the undersigned, then believe it is the privilege and responsibility of this community to cooperate with the national government by ensuring the democratic way of life to all members of the community.
And the newspaper was very influential on anything that was in this area. Everybody read the Herald.
And what's great about those petitions, too, is they went to the Monterey Herald, because the Monterey Herald published all the names. And if you look at the petitions, all the names have checks on them. So we think the Herald went through them and checked it when they put the name down. People didn't put their lives so much in jeopardy when they signed a petition, I don't think, but they certainly put their professional lives in jeopardy. A young woman contacted me. She said she recognized her mother's signature on there. And she told me her mother was about 18 at the time and was working at the Hovden sardine cannery, or the Monterey Aquarium is today. She's an Italian woman. Her name was DiMaggio.
She was very strong in her own opinion. Didn't really brag about signing that because she needed the money to go help the family.
And I was just blown away by that. The fact that she signed this. Newt Hovden was to put it, a good way to say it, he was sort of a racist gentleman. And so it took a lot of guts on her end to sign this and keep her job down there.
Oh, I think if Mr. Hovden had found out she signed the petition and he had a sign saying only white people touched your fish, she would have been fired.
What makes a person sign a petition? Sometimes that requires a real act of courage, like in the case of Mary DiMaggio, but it requires an act of stepping forward. And you step forward because you're emotionally convinced, of the stakes of the petition, and you believe that if enough people sign, it can make a difference. Once you get people to think on those two things, if they're a yes on both of those, they're going to sign your petition.
The people who signed the petition were probably thoughtful people, caring people, and 3 of my family's names were on that. My father, my mother, and my uncle.
Oh, yeah, that's my mother's signature. The reason she signed it was our close relationship with the Kadani family. He was not a cold-hearted banker. He was very cautious about what he signed his name to. He knew a lot of Japanese people, and a lot of the Japanese worked for Anita Dowd, and he had a close friendship relationship with Anita Dowd.
When I was a senior in high school, they still required you to memorize the preamble. And my father would sit with me while I was memorizing it. He said to me, "Now you know the words that make this country so great." That was my dad.
My mother was Democrat. She had been a social worker before she married, had worked with the migrant laborers in Salinas. My father was fairly conservative. He was a Republican. He'd lost his sight when he was at Stanford Law School, but I had never seen him as an activist.
My father, he has a character in the Pipe Dreams based on Cannery Row. But here on chapter 37, it opens up, Dr. Horace Dormady hated night calls.
It brings them back, right back into the room. Marie grew up in San Francisco, was a debutante, and then did the big reverse and became a bohemian, which happened in those days.
Those 500 people that signed this back in the 1940s certainly wouldn't have known that 80 years from now, it might be a teaching tool to show other students, communities, the leaders on how to construct a petition and make a difference. And that is so powerful. When I think about the people who will read this and start their own petition, the things that they will change in their own cities or states or countries it's almost unfathomable, right? It could be anything.
I didn't know at the time, but he was very special. He understood. He didn't take me out and play catch with me, for instance, and we go fishing. It was always talking, and always talking at the lab.
It's more about being deeply moved. It takes courage to take a risk because you're going against the grain for what is right. That's much more than being proud. See, she fundamentally was a humanist, believing we're fundamentally good, and there's other stuff that gets in the way. I remember once, I think there was somebody murdered somebody or something, and it was in the paper. And I asked her, "Mom, why do people do something like that? Thinking they're evil, they're bad, they're horrible." And she said, "Oh, no, it's that horrible things must have happened to them."
A lobbyist with $1 million might get you some doors opened in various businesses or in the halls of Congress, but 1 million signatures are going to give you 1 million people who will take deeper action on your petition. And it's natural, it's authentic, right? Those people signing aren't being paid to sign, they're doing it because they believe in it, and you cannot put a price tag on that.
I think the petition really was a wonderful support for all of us who went through what we had to do during the war. I think we appreciated that.
We were sure happy to see the welcoming back ad. That was a message really saying, we welcome you back. Feel safe as long as we are here.
And my mom said that she kept that petition. It was in the Herald, right? So it meant a great deal to her.
Oh, I was very grateful. In fact, we got together and put an ad in the paper thanking them for all they had done for us,
It was kind of a hard time to get back to normal life again after spending 3 years in a camp like that.
There were anti-Japanese groups. Many of them worked very hard to say, don't come back. We don't want Japs back in our community.
There's always people that hate people, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
Approximately 30 cases of violence directed against Japanese living in California. So you can imagine as these stories start buzzing around the camps, parents are going to say, do I want to go back? Do I really feel safe and secure? Will I have a job? Will our home be there?
The personal loss that people suffered, the family losses.
The economy really is affected by these concentration camps because, number one, that they had to sell all their businesses pretty much for pennies on the dollar, or if they were lucky, someone would maintain it for them. As California, for example, prior to World War II, there were literally hundreds of these fishing boats. After World War II, you can count on one hand how many owned fishing boats.
Economic greed is such an important factor in determining, shaping human behavior. Approximately 70% of the people who were forcibly removed, 70% of that, 120,000, came back to the West Coast eventually. Farmland, real property, and business property. $3 billion. That's what they lost. Dad was a junior partner and worth about $235,000 in 1942 dollars. And they got $15,000 back.
And of course, the people who run this country needs to understand what causes things like that to happen, you know, and we were one of the victims of what happened during World War II. We were there for 3 years.
He was the man of few words. He didn't say much, but, you know, he was in the 442. There was a lot. I mean, he didn't talk about what happened at all, really, to us. Very little. I think he just put that way in a little box for 50 years, you know.
Many Issei Nisei parents did not talk about camp life with their kids. You know, kids are pretty smart. They pick up on cues. And I could see it's like life energy being sapped out of them.
All this history has passed, and we're still wrestling with some of the same exact issues.
When people don't believe in facts or science anymore, and demagoguery takes over, a lot of the civil liberties we take for granted will go down the drain. That was true then, and regrettably, that is true now.
You're asking me if there could be another internment of a racial or ethnic group in this country. First of all, it takes place today. Native American Indian reservations is a form of that.
I fear it could happen very easily, the way things are now. It could sneak up on us.
Can history repeat itself today with this kind of incarceration? Yeah, it's happening today, yeah. So many Asian American communities are the target of violence, of hate, of derogatory language. But there is also a pathway to address them. And I'm thrilled that petitions can play a part in that because you see real tangible change come from them.
I think it was unfair, but the good thing is I met my husband there. Otherwise, I never would have met him, get married to him.
Yeah, I always ask my dad why he named it owl. He says, I don't know. And I look at the building, he's got 2 owls up there on the building, and and the guy that's got it now, he's still using owl.
I mean, and it's frightening when you think about that. It's frightening to me that it could happen again today. I like to think it couldn't.
Well, I think we can work to prevent this from happening again by educating people.
Make people aware of what happened in the past so that hopefully we can avoid having it happen again in the future.
The petition to me is the very first part of that, but it's the most important because if you can get someone to add your name to an online petition today, that's the way to engage them in deeper action, whether it's, going to meet with their legislators, getting out in the streets for a march, going to a company's headquarters and delivering their petition. It's just like, it's the entry point and it's fueled by compassion.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, this country is resilient, and as bad as we think things are today, we're going to overcome it. The Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Depression, and we're still here.
The Constitution is always interpreted, and it's interpreted by power. It's an ongoing discussion that we'll have to have continually.
And this month alone have seen countless petitions asking for, communities to take violence toward Asian Americans more seriously, or for schools to address it with curriculum, or for media outlets to write about the stories of Asian Americans who've experienced hate crimes.
Americans, as good as they are, good comparatively, if they could somehow have more faith in the ability to think for themselves. Think for yourself.
Enculturated history is learned, parent to child. But we teach them hate. We teach them kindness. Do whatever you can that you consider best for your children.
We could support acts that give people rights instead of focusing on acts that take rights away from people. We can give more to the people and expand their opportunities in all manners instead of just confining them simply out of plain fear or unbased ignorance.
Japanese American internment has been swept under the rug of American history ever since it happened. This sort of homogenized notion of American history, where we're this big melting pot who all come together, is the big myth. And it's only when we demand that this history get placed in curricula, get placed before young children growing up in our country, that they know about it. And if they don't know about it, then they can't understand how it could happen again.
Government by ensuring the democratic way of life to all members of the community.
I think petitions are a real lesson in social history and cultural history and civil rights history.
This is a national story because it shows us the light. That's what this shows us. It shows us the better part of us, not the bad, dark, ugly part of us. And America is encompassed by both.
Saying something is the absolute best thing that we can do anytime something like this happens. That's the model. That's the way people are supposed to behave. It gave that wonderful group of people a wherewithal to say the right thing. Just say the right thing and say it over and over.
The past is prologue. So what do the petitions mean? It is past history, an event that happened with a ton of significance attached to it, which will carry on as prologue for the future. and carry a legacy and a story for all future generations.
Behind the scenes, yes. And in this version, my name is not there except at the end where it says I own the film. But my husband Rick and I have been involved with this film since its beginning, and we started before COVID.
A couple of years before.
And we were granted a small grant by the Go for Broke Foundation, which is the foundation that supports the 442nd that you heard about in the film. And they were writing about communities across the United States who showed courage and compassion to the Japanese Americans during the internment and afterwards. We were one of the communities chosen because of the petitions. So we were given a grant to make a 20-minute film for the classroom. But when we hired David Schendel, he said, I'm sorry, we can't make this film in 20 minutes. And the film grew and grew and grew until it became an hour long. And then we then afterwards said, no, we really want this to be in the classroom. We want kids to know about this. So we and another person edited this film down to 30 minutes for the classroom, and then developed a teacher's guide and a discussion guide for community groups after they see the film.
So we kind of went full circle. We wanted it to be 20 minutes, and it got to be an hour plus. And then we had it edited back down so we could get it on PBS, and where it is now residing, and it's going to be seen more and more. And then we had to work backwards to make it what we wanted to have it be, and that was a half-hour version so we could use it in schools.
So tell me, what were your initial reactions to the film?
You know, I really enjoyed that you were able to interview some of the, as they were listed, the survivors, and especially Ed Ricketts Jr., which I saw he passed in 2019 or so. Was he, how did you find him?
That was interesting. We got a group of students who were our volunteers, and they did a ton of research, and they went back through all of those names in the petition and spent months looking for people. And so I'm sure that we missed a lot, but we were very happy that we got as much as we did, and as many names and as many relatives as the people who were actually in the film, or actually signed the petition.
I'm glad the film is very powerful. One of the pieces that I thought was very interesting was the financial loss of all the families and sort of the unnamed who gained all those fishing boats, who gained all those properties. And even when I was really young and still in college, I was with my grandfather on the Monterey Peninsula. And a really nice farm stood out to me. I don't know that much about farming, but it was clean without blackberries and nice. And he said, oh yeah, that's Joe's. You know, his dad had to go to the camp, and his neighbor had bought the farm for $1. I was like, oh wow, that's really quite not much money. And he said, yeah, but when the family came back, the neighbor sold it to them for $1. So they were able to preserve under his name.
Fortunately, there are a lot of stories like that. So there are good stories as well as the not so good stories.
Yeah, it was a very balanced film. I thought it was moving, and I thought one thing that wasn't in the film, I don't think, but my grandfather he lived in Monterey, and he was against the internment, but his brother, who was a judge, was in favor of the internment, and so it split families in many ways. And my grandfather, I think he sponsored, I think at a certain point, in order for some of the Japanese Americans to return, they needed sponsors. And have you heard that at all?
I'm not surprised, because they were given $25 when they left the camp.
Right, yeah, and he hired them to work, and they did laid trails behind Monterey High School in the gully that was there on Herman Drive, and then they opened Cypress Garden Nursery. So,
I believe that the sponsors were, during the internment, I think for people to work outside the camps, they had to have sponsors.
Oh, they had to have sponsors.
There were a lot of people that were able to leave the camps and went east and worked. What was the women who went to nursing school and things like that?
Yes, there's another video story about that. Actually, my two aunts went to Chicago to work as domestics just to get out of the camp.
Well, the movie Beyond Barbed Wire that was done, it was about the 442nd Regiment, and Yukio Sumido was one of the people that was in that regiment. And
right, who was the person in the film.
Yeah, but when he came back, he was given help, even though he was a decorated war hero. You know, the treatment was not necessarily, extended.
I was born after the war, so when I grew up, we lived in the Bay Area, and I had some really good friends in school who were Japanese, and they were telling me all the time about the prejudice against them, and I never could understand it. And it broke my heart because they were as American as I was, and they were more Californian than I was, because I was born in the Midwest. And it makes me feel so good to know that Monterey stood up and said, this can't happen, and unfortunately we're seeing it happening again.
I had watched this once before, not too long ago, but even since then, watching it again tonight just made it so much more real now that what we're in the space we're in right now. It's just, it just made me, it was very moving. And there are so many, well, the petition thing is a part that I hadn't noticed so much before. And there's a similar thing going on. Different city councils and county boards of supervisors around the country are starting to write resolutions of condemnation against what's going on with the federal government. And so there's something that that we might, as citizens, sign on to these too, after the city council people do it and the supervisors.
We started this and to talk about civil rights, civil liberties, social and economic justice, not knowing that today's situation would occur, which really kind of ties to this film 70 years later.
Yeah, on a personal note, I know we did, because of the length of time and the film was slowed down by COVID and there was a lot added to it. And so we spent months kind of re-editing and trying to strike a balance. And personally, when the film was complete, I was not particularly happy with it because I thought it overstated some of those things. And that was before what we've seen in the last 5 months, you know, and all of a sudden it becomes more and more in focus. So.
You had mentioned that PBS has this, and did they help fund it then?
PBS, well, they helped. We went to NorCal Public Radio Television, and they helped us get onto PBS through the organization called NEDA, and I don't know what NEDA stands for, but that's what we applied to.
I think that's back. So has it been aired many times?
It's been aired all across the United States. It's been aired several times in Washington, New York, excuse me, not in our area.
Okay. It's amazing how many little PBS stations there are. And I think, I don't know what the count is, maybe there's 50 or 60 stations that have
probably more like 100 almost now.
That have shown it across the nation. So it takes a lot of stations before before there's really a mass of people who see it.
It is also on the PBS website.
So you can actually stream it off.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
I wanted to piggyback on what Lynn said about how relevant it is to what's happening in our community, specifically with our immigrant neighbors today. And it hit me so hard. It would have hit me anyway, but I wanted to make sure everybody knows that there's a training at the Unitarian Church tomorrow for legal observers. And there's a sign up online from the Rapid Response Team. So if you can attend that tomorrow, you can take what you learned today. The idea of a physical petition, to me, is so powerful. And those of you who know me know I'm like this online crazy lady. But the power of that, the visual signatures, I think we can bring that into our very electronic world today. There's so many lessons to learn for what we're struggling about. I thank you so much for that. The movie is just wonderful. Also, Lynn and I went to high school together, and I don't remember learning any of this in high school. Did you?
No. Probably not until college.
Right, but it's, and I talked to somebody before I came here today who's quite a bit younger than we are, and they did learn. So I know, I just really hope you're getting into the school systems.
It's been amazing as the story has gone across east of the Rockies, how people have never heard of the internment. And so we really want the film to be shown east of the Rockies, as well as getting the educational version out to students, even in our area.
Are they receptive locally? Monterey Unified and Salinas Unified, are the school systems receptive to your?
Not yet.
Not yet?
The county superintendent of schools, Denise Newman, has seen the film and she's very excited about it. And I would support showing it to others. So we're hopeful.
One of the things we found out, which was surprising to us when we got a consultant to help us market the film, he automatically started talking about marketing to colleges. And we were talking about, well, originally we thought we should market it to public schools, to high schools. And the thing he pointed out is that in California, you could do that. But the problem is if you try to go into high schools, you have to go through the school board and you have to go through the county Department of Education. And the worst one, of course, is you have to go through the PTA. And if you wanted to market it to high schools in Florida or Texas, for instance, you are out of luck. It's just not worth the trouble to try to do that. And so I think in California and by word of mouth, Carolyn was the school administrator and has lots of contacts in this area. So she's been able to make contact with many school administrators. And I think, so it has been shown in some of the schools, and I think it will continue.
I'm a resident here in Seaside, and I grew up in Seaside my whole life.
Louder.
And I went to Seaside High, and I remember learning about the forced removal of Japanese Americans, but it wasn't as deep a level as the film showed here, and it really gave some context to what actually happened. I remember learning about it and being like, that wasn't very fair or very nice, but there was a lot of things in our textbook that was detailing what our government did to different populations that wasn't fair or nice. But having that context, the context there to make those connections and understand how that is now applying to a lot of my family and other neighbors here at this moment gives like a lot of weight and power to the film. So I thank you for that and for coming up with that the discussion questions like that for teachers to have with their youth as well. I also want to say I think teachers do want to, at least when 10, 15 years ago when I was in high school here in Seaside High, do care about the nuances in the history, and especially California history here. And I think reaching out to them as well as how can the actual teachers have a say into the discussions with the school district, because I know there can be a lot of stops there. They're not as efficient as one would like MPUSD to be. But the teachers, I think, can also have a very big impact. And if they had access to that material, could, do a lot of good in their classroom.
So if you know of a teacher who would like to show the film and talk with their students, please let us know.
I do. Thank you.
Please let us know.
This weekend's the Abalone Festival. Yes. Is the petition on exhibit at the JACL?
Yes.
It is.
Check
in the basement?
The actual petition is at Cal State Monterey Bay. I think copies are at.
Copies, yeah, but we can see the signatures.
Yes.
Once the petitions were, it sat in that cupboard for 50 years.
Yeah.
Once they were discovered, it was like, oh, you can't just keep it here, you have to do something special with it. And
You have
we're
to
going,
protect it.
yeah,
It's been
we're going, we're going, well, it's been sitting here 50 years. So it was a little, it was serious, but it was kind of funny that people all of a sudden got so nervous and upset because we wanted to keep them there. So, yes, sir. Amen.
Yeah, it's funny to see this today only because, so my mother did her estate planning, finished it yesterday. She's Sansei from Kauai. And so the big part of what she put in there was what her parents left her. I can't remember if they bought the house right before the war or after, but it's strange to think 80 years later, that big something that goes from my grandparents to my uncle, my aunt, my mom, and now me, might not have been there. Just if my grandfather should happen to have come here rather than Kauai all those years ago. You know, so it's, you know, the effects are far ranging. You know, even though it happened in 42, you know, I'm gonna get something nice, you know, hopefully not too soon. But I'm gonna get something, you know, simply because they were able to leave something and it wasn't taken from them.
A petition, basically, it doesn't change the law. It's trying to change people's heart. So once it was published in a newspaper, all the opposition gradually died out. Is that what happened? Because there were organizations, you know, trying to not welcome the Japanese, and we collected the petition to counter that. And it doesn't make law or anything. No. And so the fact it was published in the paper somehow changed people's mind.
I think to a great extent. I think the point was that somebody spoke up. And I think that people, when people read that, and people read the names that were represented in the petition, I think it helped to change minds. And I think many of us today labor under the same kind of process where we feel something, but we don't say anything. And then somebody says something, and then we feel empowered to say something. I don't know how much it changed people's minds, but I would hope that it did.
Also in the film, it kind of hinted that this particular petition in Monterey also impacted other places, other actions. Did it?
I don't think it did at the time.
Okay.
I think that some of the statements that were made were probably things that when I mentioned that there were things in the film that I didn't feel comfortable with, I think that there were some conclusions drawn about the strength of the petition that probably weren't real. I think the idea that the strengths of some petitions can be very strong. But this petition, I think you saw what impact it had.
And I think what we're trying to show in the film is the courage and compassion that was shown by the people of Monterey. And that's one of the themes that we would like to carry. Obviously, the themes of civil rights stand out right now, and economic and social justice, but I think the courage and compassion part needs to stay with us.
Talking about the Monterey Herald, it also shows the importance of having a media and that voice in the media. The woman who sent a letter from the concentration camp, her voice was so strong, it humanized her to say that it was her husband or her...
It was her daughter who was reading the letter.
Her daughter was reading the letter, but she talked, her mother was talking about either her husband or brother who was serving.
Her husband.
Her husband. Those things, those were important, that was an important voice to hear, for everyone to hear in this conversation that's here in the Herald. So that was one aspect. And one other thing that I just wanted to mention, those concentration camps were set up in places where humans had never lived, a lot of them. And I've been reading about it just, you know, in preparation for this, and going down rabbit holes and things, but there was so much sand, they were so sandy, people would be covered, their hair would be white, their eyelashes, these extremely inhospitable conditions. And you didn't dwell on that in this film. You focused on community and how it tears the fabric of the community. So that must have been a conscious decision to sort of downplay the horrors of the...
Yeah, I think that there are several, as we've worked on this, there are several films that have been made about the internment. And I think that, you know, we didn't want to go back and say this was a terrible thing, bang, bang, and beat on the same drum. You know, I think that was obvious.
Well, this was powerful. So, effect on the community.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I think John Durang was interviewed. He's the son of, I don't remember his father's name, but I believe his father was the editor of the Monterey.
Ted.
Yeah, Ed Durang.
He was the editor of the Monterey Herald, so that helps getting the voice out.
I think it was interesting when Mrs. Sumida wrote the letter. You know, it was interesting that she was incarcerated and she got the newspaper #1. And she wrote the letter back and it was published. And I'm thinking, you know what? I don't know if that would have happened today. You know, I wonder about somebody who's incarcerated now, if they wrote a letter to the newspaper, whether it would ever get back. You know, so I thought that was one bit of information that where information did move back and forth, you know, quite rapidly, quite effectively.
It just has made me realize, I'm thinking that everyone affected, the Japanese American population affected, must be going through some like real more pain because of what's going on right now. You know, watching this.
You know, I'm going to say something that she probably won't want me to say. I tend to find humor. I like to find humor in things. And one of the comments I used to make often after we were first married is I used to say that my wife was the last American born in captivity. She was born in Poston, Arizona at the end of the war. And what I realized is I thought that was a very unique position. And I realized today that there are a lot of people being born in captivity. And so you're not so special.
Well, I was one of the last because I actually met someone who was born after me in Poston. So,
I didn't think it was. She was, I think, 2 weeks later.
2 weeks later. 2 weeks later. Yes.
As a product of someone who went to school in New York, I think it's important that you tell everyone to the East Coast about what happened here in California, because we really weren't taught about it. And I recall when I was in 6th grade, the teacher took me aside and said, "You don't have to watch this film." He knew that my family was Japanese American, and I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Well, it's about Nagasaki and Hiroshima." And I said, "My family's from Kagoshima." That's the Florida of Japan. And he was like, "Oh." And he said, "Do you want me to explain anything?" And the little girl who was going on the train or the bus to the camp with her suitcase with a little tag, I said, "Tell me what this is." And he couldn't say anything. So I think your film would be a godsend to the people on the East Coast. Truly, I do.
So I hope you're watching it back there, because it has been shown quite a bit on the Midwest and East Coast, but there's no way to know who watched it.
And we had a friend who owned a store, a Japanese sort of supermarket, and he kept telling me, we were blessed to have the 442 guys. And I thought, yeah, more dying, I don't know, but yes. So please, if you can get your story, your film out there.
We're trying.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.